Hello, everybody. Welcome to the world's blackest panel. My name is Willie Jackson, and I'll be your moderator for the moment. Why don't we do some brief introductions? Who are we? Maurice loves going first. Maurice, who are we? Maurice is not going first.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. All right. Yes. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Xavier Cunningham. I work as a product operations manager currently at LinkedIn. I've been in the Bay for about 4 years now, and I guess a connoisseur of tech for a little over 8.5 years. Previously to LinkedIn, I worked at Apple for 8 years in an array of roles in sales, technical support, B2B, product integration, and then in product engineering before transferring to LinkedIn. I love all things fashion, and my biggest passion is how to find the intersectionality between fashion and tech, and how to really make people's experiences around their style and their personal branding their own, and how we can use technology to really enhance that, to make it more inclusive. So that's a little about me.
Awesome. My name is Ajene Green. I lead business development and retail channel sales for a company called Walker & Company. And if you haven't heard of it, please look it up. But we are a health and beauty company whose sole purpose is to make health and beauty easier for people of color, right? So I have been in the Bay for 1.5 years, so I'm relatively new here. Before moving to the Bay, I worked in ad tech for 5 years for a small company in New York. And prior to that, I worked for L'Oreal in marketing and sales positions for a number of brands in their professional products division.
Willie Jackson. I've been in the Bay 1.5 years as well, and what 1.5 years it has been. Glad to be here. My background is in tech, actually. I started my career with a company called Accenture, and I was living out of an airplane, suitcase, airport near you. And I left that life, and I've been working for myself more or less for the past 8 years or so. Dabbled a little bit in book publishing, magazine publishing. I launched an online magazine for Black men about 4 years ago. And a bit of a professional dilettante. I'm a prototypical Aquarius. I jump out of perfectly good airplanes for a living. So, you know, I might be dropping an album tomorrow. You got to keep an eye on me. You never know.
He is Beyonce of the group, so.
So rude. So rude. By way of that rudeness, who are you?
I mean, I guess that's a perfect segue. My name is Maurice Wilkins. I lead diversity, equity, and inclusion at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. We're a really small nonprofit in Palo Alto. Just kidding. But before coming to CZI, I worked at a few startups, but my career actually began in education. So I worked with young people committed to the juvenile justice system. I've been in the Bay, hard to say, but 3 years, which is really hard for me to believe. And that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, I didn't say I'm a consultant with a diversity strategy firm called ReadySet, but my CEO might want me to. So I'm a consultant with a diversity strategy firm called ReadySet. Based in Oakland, work mostly with tech companies and nonprofits, and it's a lot of fun. Maurice, for a little orientation and grounding, why are we here? Why is it important to assemble this particular panel today?
Good question. So from my perspective, I think that as you're thinking about tech and you think about conversations, particularly around inclusion, oftentimes the way in which we create those panels or conversations, they don't often center the perspectives of Black men.
When you say not often, you mean never.
Yeah, I mean never, but I was trying to be nice. And actually, we did it another time, so this is the second time you've seen a panel of just Black men.
The punchline doesn't work as well when you do that.
I know, but I wanted to say that. But nevertheless, yeah, you don't see that often, and so I wanted to create a space and opportunity for conversations like this to exist and to happen, and to also show the diversity of Blackness, particularly in Black men. Oftentimes when you're in spaces that don't look like the one that you see right now, there's an assumption that all Black men exist and show up in the world in the same way. And I see this as an opportunity to dispel that notion that Black men have to exist and show up in a monolithic way. So we see this as an opportunity to do that.
So on that topic of difference, Ajene, you've had an interesting journey to, I mean, not just to where we are, not just to America and tech, but like give us some highlights of how you arrived here and a little bit of your context.
Okay, so
Based on your name and your accent, I'm assuming you're from Antioch or maybe Daly City.
Newark. So I was born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica, on the playground where I spent most of my day. No, okay. So born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica, to a kind of quirky entrepreneurial family. So I had entrepreneurs for parents, but educators for grandparents. So for me, growing up, education was absolutely paramount. So my parents definitely pushed that notion, excelling in school, focusing on my books, and then participating in a number of different extracurricular activities, soccer being one of them. And I was fortunate enough, and I think we'll talk a little bit about, luck and black exceptionalism on this panel, but I was fortunate enough to learn about the private boarding school system while I was in Jamaica. I was basically handpicked because of good grades, doing well in sports, to be almost a test subject at a boarding school in New England. So when I was 16 years old, I left my home in Jamaica and moved to New England to a prep school where I rubbed shoulders with the kids of the founders of Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, complete culture shock, a different world for me. But with being Jamaican and fiercely proud, I went to that world with almost a chip on my shoulder and something to prove. So I excelled in school, I excelled in sports, I focused on that. And that took me through university, went to Columbia University. While there, started looking around at various careers. Everything was pushing me towards the whole finance world, finance and international relations, law school. Didn't really want to do that. And ultimately, after a number of internships, ended up finding an internship at L'Oreal that I was accepted to. And for whatever reason, I enjoyed working in health and beauty. So I started my career there and did that for 3 years before deciding to take a leap into the tech world. It was 2009, the tech world was booming. I definitely wanted to dabble in something different in my career, and that's how I transitioned into tech. So worked for a small ad tech company, grew with that company for 5 years before melding both my tech background and my health and beauty background to join Walker and Company. Yeah, that's kind of my story.
Thank you. And Xavier, you don't have a technology background. Like I was more or less. I mean, tech was always my path, and that hasn't been your story. What has your journey to the tech industry been like, and what are some of the highlights?
Oh man, perseverance, I think, is what the journey has been about, right? And just really kind of staring an opportunity in the face and going after it. Sometimes an opportunity falls. I wish I could say it's like, oh, you thought about this and then you went after it, and it's like, yeah. And it's like, no, sometimes opportunity just falls in your lap by chance. And it's about being ready to kind of seize that moment. So for me, I come from a long family of fashion aficionados. Like, I think I could tie a bow tie before I could tie my shoelaces. Mm-hmm. Like, that was just a thing. And so fully, wanting to be like Eddie Murphy and Boomerang, like I was gonna go into like marketing, for anybody who knows that movie.
Miss Ajene.
One person in the back, thank you. 2 people, awesome. And so I wanted to go into marketing. People is my thing, really. Even now, I don't really consider, I haven't worked in tech for now almost 10 years. I still don't really consider myself a techie. I think if you can harness the power of people and being able to connect with people, you can learn and you can grow and adapt to what the tech is. But ultimately, the tech needs to service the person and the human. And so if you can always connect and learn the human, I think being able to make that tech resonate with the human will always be relevant. And so, long story short, after undergrad, I went into school in London at the College of Fashion and Arts for strategic fashion marketing, and thought I was just going to absolutely, like I said, be this marketing head and guru and think of all these crazy, beautiful campaigns. But London is expensive, if anyone doesn't know, and grad school is expensive in general. So taking a semester off, to look for grants and funding to go back to school. At this time, I had converted like all of my family and friends to like Apple products. I went from like not being a fan to being like the #1 promoter. And so I needed a job, and my mom was like, you're not gonna stay home looking for money without making money. So chance, I just literally applied online at apple.com for a part-time sales job. And so I am, as cliche as it is, I am literally Drake's like started from the bottom story. You can't enter into Apple any more beginner than like part-time sales in a retail store. I got a few Apple people who know. And so that's how I started. And that was really like my first introduction to like tech, if you will. But it was mostly, again, about the people. So after doing that, in 6 months, I got promoted to full-time. Another 2 months, I was promoted to business sales. And for people who don't know, most of Apple's B2B market, business sales, happens in the retail store. So whether it's small or medium businesses. So I transitioned to that team, then wanted to learn how to service those people on a more technical route. And so I became a technical trainer. That took me to DC, where I led a team there in a number of different stores. Chance opportunity to go to Cupertino to work on some of our retail technology solutions via just a recommendation from my leader at the time. So I was flying back and forth from DC to Cupertino for probably 4, 5, 6 months at a time. Long story short, I was offered an opportunity to stay and work on Apple's retail technology solutions. So if you go into the store and you get wrung out on an iPhone, I was the guy working on building that product. And so all of that, again, is mostly about me saying, how can people interact and get the best experience out of their technology? And that has somehow led me to LinkedIn to do a similar thing. And now focusing on how we can do that to create jobs for people around the tech.
I love that. Maurice, talk to me a little bit about this. So when you look at our respective biographies, we've all had different paths to tech, and that means different things based on maybe our socioeconomic status, maybe our cultural or ethnic background, maybe the context from which we come, just socially. What's top of mind for you as you think about the impact that CZI is having in providing jobs, in investing, in providing impact opportunities? What's top of mind for you as you think about scaling your work?
Yeah, so I think before actually thinking about like what's top of mind for like the work that I do, for me it's what's top of mind around how I show up and how I exist in the world. And so I come from DC, particularly to parents who were products of the 1980s crack epidemic. So my family spent a lot of time, particularly my dad and my mother, in and out of jail. My mother today makes less than $13 an hour, and so the way in which I show up is as a black man who grew up extremely poor, and now I use that opportunity to be seen as an exception. So a lot of people like invested in me in a way because I wasn't like the rest of the kids that I grew up with. I wasn't like the people in which my mother was associated with, and so I see that as an opportunity to now use the power and privilege that I have being at one of the largest philanthropies in the world, with a lot of resources and capital and political power to be able to use that as an opportunity to create access, to be able to build spaces for folks who typically wouldn't get that. And CZI is literally at the crux of being able to lead the way on a lot of really interesting work. And so we focus in education, what we call justice and opportunity, which includes criminal justice reform, which is near and dear to my heart because my parents spent time in jail, and then science, leading the way on some really interesting work there. And quite honestly, if we look at my road to where I am, I should not be here if we follow those paths. And so I use that, the reality that I'm an exception, the reality that these things just don't fall into laps like mine, to then use that to make sure that other folks like me are able to have a seat at the table. And if they don't have a seat at the table, let's rip the table up and create a completely new one. And so that's really the place in which I see my work, but more importantly, seeing the work of Priscilla and Mark doing that.
That's what's up. Things got a little radical there in that answer.
I mean, I believe it. So
I didn't know which panel I was at. I like that panel.
I mean, we're all black men. So.
Ajene, talk to me a little a little bit about the notion of belonging and how you specifically find places that feel like home for you, because I think the notion of home for you has been a bit of a moving target since you were, what, 16?
16.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And I've had conversations with Maurice and Xavier about this, but
Well, why haven't we talked about it?
because you haven't come over to my place.
Okay, continue, please.
You're invited.
Because you're Beyonce. You don't have time for that.
This is true. Beyonce.
They don't have context for that joke.
You're the one in the jacket. You're the superstar.
moderating.
You're the superstar.
We're doing
on
a
the
panel
on-
right now.
I'm
We got
Kelly.
9 minutes and 36 seconds.
All right, 9 minutes. Sorry.
So, what was the question? Belonging. So, the conversations that I've had with Maurice and Xavier have been around specifically belonging and the feeling of belonging here in the Bay Area. Because since I've moved out here, this has been the first time in my life where I've felt isolated, where I felt some tinge of loneliness and not belonging. And that's primarily because, you know, I do live in Oakland, but I work in Palo Alto. You know, I commute through San Francisco and I visit the city quite often, and I look around at the various spaces, the restaurants, the bars, the nightclubs, the barber shops, the stores, and I don't see me. I don't see people who look like me. I don't see things that fit into, you know, my culture, me, right? And when I say my culture, you know, it's a broad spectrum. I'm a black man. I'm a Jamaican, but I've lived here longer than I've lived in Jamaica now. So I'm an American. I'm a black American. I'm a Jamaican American. I'm an immigrant. And I still can't find those spaces here. Or it's harder. I shouldn't say I can't find them. It's harder to find those spaces here. And so, you know, I think that's just a very interesting point. And, you know, we've all had conversations about how can we make this better. You know, and there are a number of ways that I can think of, so I won't rattle those off yet. But yeah, it's kind of my story, I guess.
No, it's helpful, and one of the passions that Maurice and I share is convening people, bringing people together. There's something magical that happens when you bring people together for dinner or drinks or, you know, networking and so forth. And Xavier, you're probably the most relational person I've met besides myself. Like, just in the limited time we've been on track, I haven't seen you spot a hand you didn't want to shake. And I'd be curious about the way that you create community for yourself, because you're just you're a connector, like you're a relational person, and I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
Man, how to? A lot of it is, you know, I give credit to my mother. I am a product of a single, you know, parent household, and I think that's always important, you know, for me to say, just because my mother's my rock, and so I think my foundation for anyone is very important, and that's kind of where I begin. It's always understanding that every person you encounter with has something to give to you. You know, it was important for me, for those who can't see my sweater, to wear the sweater that says 100% human, because there's so many things that I think we constantly find that create separation from one another. And if we start at our foundation of just being human beings, I think it's very easy, right, to like meet someone and want to say, I want to get to learn something about that person. And so I think I typically start, you know, building community around the basics of just truly giving undivided attention to the human being that's right in front of me. And what can I get to learn? How can I connect with this particular person? It has to be something. There has to be one thing, right? No matter where you're from. And you know, I'm born in, you know, Columbia, South Carolina. Most of my family's from Charleston. There's like one traffic light in my mom's town, right? So it's like the people there very rarely leave South Carolina. It's just not a thing. And yet, having those roots, I've still been able to travel the world, 30 countries. I mean, I've spoken to diplomats. I've connected with so many different people. But it always starts for me to just say, there's one thing. And I think if we can just start small and build with one thing, and then be open to be vulnerable. So I think a lot of times we aren't open to being vulnerable and exposing. Sometimes we build community and then we're like, no, this is my community. I don't want anyone else around it, right? And we hold dear to that. And I'm a person who always, I have some friends in the audience, they know if I know you, I'm going to connect you to someone else. And when I do connect you, I'm going to rattle off at least 20 things that are phenomenal about you, right? Like, I will become your publicist in an instance, right? And I think that's how we can start to build community, to have those genuine interactions to where we say, hey, you're a person, I'm a person, let's connect something. And then from there, let's connect one thing else. And then let's connect another thing else. And before you know it, right, you have a web of people.
Fired. Maurice, what are companies missing? So when you think about recruiting people, building genuine relationships with people, having a recruiting function that's culturally responsive, just the whole gamut of what recruiting, promoting, and retaining diverse talent looks like. What are companies missing? What are you seeing? What might be worth sharing in this context?
That's a hard question. I think that part of it is companies don't look at the process holistically. So there are companies who are like, okay, we're going to focus just on the recruiting. There are other companies who are like, okay, we're going to just sponsor a bunch of events. I think part of what makes the interesting, particularly at CZI, is we're still really early, but we're thinking holistically about how we build out the function. And so that's everything from what are the ways in which you show up in communities, particularly the communities that you want to recruit from. And so beyond just recruiting, beyond just sponsoring events, I'm figuring out spending time in communities. I'm ensuring that I'm meeting the right people. I'm building relationships in a way that oftentimes we don't want to, because it's about the short-term game, which I totally understand. But at CZI, we have a little bit of more time to actually think about those pieces. And then once we're in the interview process, how are we intentionally thinking about the ways in which there is exclusion that exists within that space? And so we're thinking about how do you mitigate some of that? And then once you're at CZI, you're thinking about what are the ways in which you are really building a holistic program. And so that's everything from learning and development to the policies that exist in the space down to the food. And so ensuring that we are really thinking about creating spaces that are authentic, but also allow for people to show up in a really, really interesting way. So one example is that, and I think a lot of people have started to do this, but Juneteenth, a lot of people don't even know what the hell Juneteenth is, but using that as a learning opportunity, but also using it as a way to allow for people to have a space and celebrate the heritage that comes along with that, but not in a like let's show off the black people type of thing. And so I think part of it is like using those learning opportunities, creating ways to allow for meaningful relationships to form, and then using the people that are in the space to build more meaningful opportunities to build that together. So that's what I'm thinking about.
No, I love that. And Ajene, what are some of your values around finding belonging in the spaces that you inhabit? What do you look for in an employer that reflects a kind of place that you might feel comfortable building a career or spending some time?
Somebody who's willing to have the hard conversations and listen. And listen, and then take action based on some of the hard truths that may be surfaced. So transparency, I think that's super important. In addition to that, investing, right? I think it could almost be as simple as that. Put your money where your mouth is. Invest in activities, opportunities that help people of color. Black people, right?
Would you build on that?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the work, what I look for as far as the workplace, or
what's missing from it broadly? So aligning your values with what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think honestly, what's missing is to Ajene's last point. I think it's a lot of it's creativity. I think a lot of companies are just maybe mimicking and doing something that they see someone else doing, especially whatever.
Unsuccessfully.
and a lot of it being unsuccessful. So, I take an example of the Washington Leadership Academy. If you never heard of it, it's a public charter school. It takes over 60% of its kids, 9 through 12th grade is the school's demographic, but over 60% are at-risk youth, over 80% underserved communities, and the entire focus, even though they go through the same curriculum as any other school, is around STEM and coding and tech. It is literally the Hogwarts of reality and of DC. And if you Google the school, Washington Leadership Academy, they are dedicated and focused to making sure everything, whether they're learning English. It's all around STEM. And so they're enriching these kids in a very meaningful way, and they're being creative about it. And so I think a lot of it is about how can we be creative. LinkedIn has a program called Reach, where they take people from nowhere close to being tech backgrounds, and they train them in technological advancements on how to do coding, right? And so creativity.
Y'all have been great. Thank you. That's it. We got a sign that says, please stop. It's a wrap.
There is a sign. There is a sign. Oh, Wayne does have a.
Hold up.
He can veto the sign. So.
Hello. I personally want to thank Maurice's entire panelists for doing this. We do, Millennial Recreative Inclusion Conference, and we've been doing it for 4 years. I think this is the first time we've had a panel of all black men, and it shouldn't have been the first, but it's the first time. And also, as a black man, I feel and understand everything that's being said, and I want to just say thank you all, and you all hug, because people don't see us as emotional beings and humans, but this panel means a lot to me personally, and because it's representation that often, as a black man doing diversity work, we are left out a lot of times. And it's not about who has it the worst, but it's about me connecting to the representation and the topic, and that's what I'm just doing right now. So I just want to thank you all and appreciate you.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you.
Good word.